Most of you should know me already, Eddie Kirkendall. So today we're going to be talking about APA. So how many of us know APA? How many of you have actually used it? Okay, we've got a few. Candace, what has been your experience with APA?
I just want to stick to MLA.
Okay, you prefer MLA, okay. Other thoughts about APA? What's probably been the biggest thing that scares you about APA?
Writing the abstract.
Okay. Formatting, kind of the abstract, doing that, which we're going to talk about, today. And so I can tell you, I don't think anyone can truly master APA unless you just got a lot of time on your hands. But part of it is actually knowing where to go to get the resources that you need. That, I think, is an important step, and we will talk about that. The handouts that I gave you, you notice that the PowerPoint, which you have a copy of that. You also will have a copy of an example from Purdue OWL, which is a great resource, to go and look at that information. Purdue OWL is awesome. I mean, very thorough. What I like about the sample paper that you have there is that it breaks every single thing down. And so if you have trouble creating the cover page, well, it's going to show you how to do that. It's also going to have little sidebars where it's going to tell you and explain why you should do it that way. And so that's what I like. It gives you an example of the abstract. Now there's a few things that it adds in there that you don't necessarily have to have, like an appendix. You don't necessarily have to have that necessarily in the paper. But it also shows you the works cited page. It's going to show you examples when we talk about like doing a block quote, various sources on there. It's going to show you those examples. And I think that's really the best way to truly learn it, is actually seeing it in practice. And so that's why I want you to have that handout. Then the other one just is about writing papers in general, which I think will be good. So if we go to the first slide here, we'll take a look. This is just kind of the overview. We're primarily going to be focusing just on APA style. And what I mean by that, we are going to be we're going to be breaking down each component. We will look at the cover page, we will look at the abstract page, we will also talk about references page, and we're going to do a lot of like in-text citations and different examples of how you could use that, and various sources on how you could use that. And then at the end, we'll talk about some of those resources. Purdue OWL will be one of the main ones that I talk about because I think it's a great place to go to. Also, let's say if you're not using APA, you decide that you need to use MLA or Chicago style or Turabian, because there's so many different types out there. You can also go to Purdue OWL and look at those as well. So it's not like Purdue OWL is only for APA. It's for a variety of different kinds. So it's a great place to look at. So we go to the first one. We will first talk about APA. Yes, I love that picture. We all make this picture, this face, when we're doing APA. Yes, yes. So picture that. And so, Kendrick, do you do this in the mirror when you're looking at APA?
Definitely.
See, right there. So, APA, American Psychological Association. So that's what it stands for. Some of APA is primarily used like psychology, sociology. You tend to see in those fields a little bit more than others. Some other additional fields, economics, criminology, business, and nursing. One thing I will say is that no matter what class you're in, a lot of it depends on the professor. Professor may say, you know what, I like APA, so you're using APA. Even though maybe it's not really for that field. Now, I majored in political science with a minor in history, and so in those courses, I primarily use Chicago style and Turabian. And Chicago and Turabian are almost identical. There's only little subtle differences in between the two. And so, but that was something that I had to work on. Now, I have used APA, depending on what kind of class it was. Psychology, I definitely used APA. MLA is primarily for the humanities area. So Comp 1, Comp 2, so your English courses, you primarily will use that. You may also use it in some history classes, depending on what level history it is. So how many of us will say that we are more familiar with MLA? Yes. And that's because your basics. Most of your basics, they tend to go towards MLA. If you are majoring in psychology, sociology, and Siobhan is, you probably encounter APA a lot more now. But can you remember back when you first started, and then you're looking at, most of your classes probably was MLA. You probably felt more comfortable in there because of why? You're used to it.
I did.
Yeah.
Now I can't remember what MLA is.
Exactly. So if you feel intimidated by APA, in time, when you take more classes and you use this, you're going to feel more comfortable. It's like learning a new language in a way. And it constantly changes. So one thing is that what we talk about now, a year from now, there may be subtle differences already. Because every year or two, they've got to come out with a new book, a new edition, and they're going to change things a little bit. And so the idea is that knowing where the resources are, like Purdue Out, because they update their website, constantly, and going to those places and looking for those updates. One thing I will also try to make clear before we really get started in some of this is that what we cover today doesn't necessarily mean your professor wants you to do it exactly that way. I've had professors who have, like, for example, when I was doing Chicago style Travian, the book said one way, the professor said another. Now, they are right. They were right most of the time because 5-10 years ago, that's what was required. They were going off of what they remembered when they were in college. And so they were just saying, do it the way that I know how to do it. They didn't care about this updated version that had those little subtle changes. And so that was a little hard for me because I was seeing the book and it was telling me one thing, but yet they're telling me something else. And so at the end of the day, always do what your professor says because they're putting the grade on paper. And so, but I would always go to that professor and make sure I clarify. I would, if I had a chance to work on the paper early, I would show them that paper so they could see that example because I want to know. It always scared me, when I turned that paper in, if they were going to mark it up for citation problems. Most of us stress out when it comes to that because we're afraid we're going to be accused of plagiarism or something. And so I just say, when in doubt, talk to your professor. And if you don't have that chance to talk and you have to turn it in, make sure you have a reference points that you can kind of say, this is why I did it. And you can say, I went to Purdue Out, this is the site that I went to, this is the example that I used, and that can at least justify why you did it a certain way. I mean, if you just say, I don't know why I did it, that's probably not going to help your case, if you're trying to get a little bit of leniency because you might have made a mistake that they didn't want you to do. At least you can show them why. So we'll look at the first page. Now, obviously, there are different sections when it comes to the APA. So, for example, we have a title page. That is a difference right there from MLA. Normally on MLA, all your stuff is on that first page, including your essay, starting on top of that. APA, you have the cover page, and you will have different components of that. If you notice up there on the top on my example, you have a running head, which is different. You don't have that, with MLA. The running head is basically a short summary, kind of a shorter version of your title. And so if you look at the title there, it says a movie review, and then it has issues, blah, blah, blah. So the long title part there, you only take that first part of your title, and you use that as your running head. So you only have to take a short version. Now, if you have a short title to begin with, you're probably going to be able to use the running head as that short title. A lot just depends on how elaborate your title is. Theirs is pretty long, so they just took that shorter version of it, the first part of it, and use that as the running head. Now, what that means, that running head, is you're going to have that on every single page, that you have. Every page, you're going to have a running head that has that short version up there. Normally, you go into your header, and you type in that area there, when you are doing that, so because they have headers and footers. And so, now the only thing I would say you don't necessarily have to do is that you also see movie review page 1. Most of the time, you don't have to have that. Most of it's just page 1, page 2, page 3. So depending on what examples you look at will depend on what they give you. And so, once you have the running head, I wouldn't worry about movie review page 1. I mean, that's not, so just page 1. Also centered is where you have your title and information, and then the bottom you typically will have your name, the course number, or whatever that course is, the professor, and then the date. I mean, now I've seen some professors give examples that are just slightly different than that. Probably not that big of a deal. I would just say if a professor gives you an example, they show you, use theirs. But if they don't give you any examples, they just say use APA, this is a reference point that you can go off of. Because I'm getting this information from Purdue Out, so probably pretty credible. And so you have your title page, you also will have your abstract page, your main body, paragraphs, and then your reference page, which is basically a works cited page. We call references using APA. In MLA, you use works cited. So if we go to the next one, we'll go in a little bit more detail. So the abstract page. So how many of us feel comfortable writing an abstract? None of us. No one's raising their hand on that. This is probably the trickiest part for a lot of people because in MLA, what are we used to? Just writing our introduction, on that first page with everything else. And so In a way, it's kind of like your introduction, in a way. It's a little bit different in that it's more of a summary. It's a summary of those main points. Normally, you want to keep it under around that 200 words count in that range. Now, I've heard people say 200, 250. I've heard some people say 150. I always kind of shoot for more the middle of something. So I'm saying around 200 words in that range. And so you'll have, basically the purpose of the paper, so that you want to have that in your abstract. The main points that you're talking about, maybe some of the methods, that you're looking at, the findings, and of course the conclusions. So when you are writing your abstract, if you can try to address those issues, the purpose, the main points, the method, findings, and conclusion, that will cover your basis, for that abstract. So in a way, it kind of reminds me of introduction, but it's just a little bit more detailed. A little bit more detailed, and it's kind of, already given some of those findings that you're talking about. So I know that, Siobhan, you've had the experience writing the abstract. Would you feel that this has probably been the biggest challenge starting off as the abstract, or do you feel pretty used to it now?
I'm okay with it now, but I've kind of learned that you don't start with the abstract. I write the paper and then I go back and write the abstract.
Yes.
So that makes it less overwhelming.
And that's exactly what I used to do a lot of times, because the hardest part about writing a paper is getting started. And knowing what you want to talk about. So a lot of times I would develop my points, what I wanted to focus on. I'd already start writing those, develop them, and then I would come back because, once you already have that information, it's going to be a lot easier to summarize, things once you've already been working on that for a while. Now, everyone's different. Some people have to do the abstract first, and so in the end, you have to find what works for you. Now, so I think Siobhan's way is probably the better way, in my opinion, on that. So because you really are going to know the material, by the end of that paper, and then it's easy to go back and create that abstract at that point. Because a lot of times you can draw off of what you've already wrote, and so it's really easy, to do it that way instead of starting from scratch. But most students that I find, the hardest problem they have is they don't know how long it should be. That's I hear that question all the time. Well, how long should my abstract be? I just say the ballpark is around the 200 words. You have to be careful because if you write it too long, and I've seen some abstracts that are like 3 and 4 paragraphs. That's not an abstract. And so, you want to avoid that. It should be basically one paragraph, very detailed, talking about the main, points, the purpose of the paper, some of those conclusions or findings, within that 200 word range. Now, are they actually going to sit there and count your words? No. But they can get an idea about how long it is. I mean, they've been looking at enough papers over the years. They can kind of tell whether or not it's in that ballpark. So I just say 150 to 250, but I choose right around the middle there, so the 200 words. So we go to the next page. We will look at, more about the in-text citation, because most students struggle with in-text citation. And we're going to look at a variety of different examples of how you can do this. Because the one thing that I found what students do is that they use the same type of format. Like when they're writing a paper, how they introduce, a sentence. They use it for every single quote that they do, that format. And a lot of professors don't want you doing that. They want to make sure that you know the rules, and there's different ways that you can cite in text in different ways. So we're going to look at that. But mainly, you want to have, in general, your last name, the author's last name. You'll have the year of publication, and then the page number if it has a page number. And so now, why is that different from MLA? What do you have in MLA for an in-text citation? Just last name, page number. You don't have the year of publication. So that right there is a difference between MLA and APA. That's why it was always good for me. I wanted to know what are the differences. What am I doing that's different than MLA? Also, one thing that you're going to notice, and I know it's kind of hard to see, but with your PowerPoints there, you can probably see a little bit closer. Look in this first paragraph, at the very bottom where they have an in-text citation. You notice that they have the last name, we'll say, Hendrick. You have a comma. That is right there a difference between, APA and MLA. MLA does not have those commas inside. So you have Hendrick, comma, then the year of publication, 1992, comma, and then you actually have a P, period, and then the page number, close the parentheses, and then the period on the outside. MLA does not, you don't put a P, in there. It's just Hendrick, and then you space one time, and then you put the page number. That's it. So right there, that's a difference, and that's because a lot of students are like, well, how can you tell? How can you tell the difference? That right there is the difference. I can tell that they're using APA because of that. So So when you are trying to do that, you want to make sure you have the last name, you use your comma, you find the year of the publication that it came out in, comma, and then P period, and then the page number. In this case, it's 46. And we'll talk about that period of being on the outside too, because when you are doing in-text citation, so after you paraphrase or you quote someone, a direct quote, you will have that at the end of the sentence. Now, you notice that the period is on the outside. Well, what is another circumstance where you don't have that period on the outside, but you have it in the inside? Block quotes. Block quotes are different. And it's the same rule that applies with MLA. In block quotes, which we'll talk about, and it's an example in that Purdue OWL paper it shows in there, you have to have the period on the inside rather than the outside. It's the only time that you normally do that, which is different, and it throws people, on that. So that's why I gave you that sample paper, because it will cover everything you want to know when it comes to writing a paper. So keep those little subtle differences in mind. Any questions about this so far? Anything that we're not sure about before we go really dive into it and show examples? Yes?
Does the abstract have a page just to itself?
Yes. Yes. Normally, you will have your cover page, and then the next page is your abstract, and then you start the next page where it's the actual body paragraphs. And then now your references page is, is essential, with the body paragraphs and everything else. Now, it does have its own separate page as well, but it's all together. And so if we're looking at our components, when we were going back and adding them all up, you'd have your cover page, your abstract page, which is separate, and then you have your body paragraphs, your reference page is normally at the very end, on its own separate deal with all your sources, alphabetical order, and so that's basically your paper. Now, the example that I give you, sometimes they have charts and appendices, where it shows additional information. You can have that in there. It shows the example how to do that, but most of us are not going to have that. So, but the abstract it is separate, on a different deal. Yes.
Did you tell them why an abstract's important? Or maybe everybody already knows that. But I always wondered that when I started, why it was.
Well, you tell me.
It makes it nice when you go into like literature reviews and all that different stuff, that you can read that abstract and see if you were totally interested in that article or not. Because if you had to read through 15 pages, that takes forever. But if you look at that abstract, you're like, oh, I can use this. Or, oh, I can, and you're done with that, and then you move faster that way. That's the whole purpose.
And when the the professor is going to read your paper, they get a snapshot of what to expect, when it comes to your paper. And when you're going out there doing research, trying to find a good paper, that helps you. A lot of times you'll see, on these websites or these periodicals, they have an abstract. You can look at the purpose of their paper, main points, and you can determine, normally looking at that abstract, whether or not you want to use, that paper, which you want to continue to read on, instead of reading 15, 20 pages into it and then decide, I don't really want to use this paper. So the abstract allows that snapshot, for you to determine whether or not that's the paper or article that you want to read. And so it saves you time, I think, by looking at that. And so if we go down to the next page, and at any time we're talking about this, stop me if you're not sure on something. These are examples of, doing in-text citation using short quotes. So short quotes, there are 3 different examples here of how you can use this. So like when you are writing your paper and you already have your source, what you want to use, there are 3 different ways that you can kind of basically use an in-text. So example 1, and this is something that I see a lot of students that use, but they'll say according to Jones, or whoever the author may be. So before they're getting ready to go into the quote, they're going to say according to so-and-so, and then they're going to have the quote. Now, when you use APA, you're going to have to use the publication. So since you are mentioning the author, according to Jones, that's why the next step you're going to have parentheses, and then you're going to have the publication year that the article came out, or book, or whatever it is. So it looks weird when you do this, but this is one example. So according to Jones, 1998, and then you have the quote, and then at the very end, since you've already mentioned Jones, in the sentence that leads into the quote, you do not have to have Jones in that parentheses then, nor do you have to have the year of publication, because you already have it up there at the beginning. So that's why you only have to put P period 199. And so that's one example. How many of us have used that? Or at least an abbreviation of that, kind of. Okay, so that's one way. Now what I find is a lot of students, when they do this, they use that a lot, in their paper. I mean, it's like every quote that they use, it's that style. Now, why would that not be so good? And I see some shaking hands, heads there. So why?
Because the professor doesn't, they want you to use your own words, they don't want you to quote all constantly.
They don't want you quoting all this all the time, every single time. And when you do quote, they don't want you using the same format every single time, because it basically, it kind of ruins the flow of your paper.
Well, that makes it look like you only know how to do one way.
Only know how to do one way, yeah. And so, but a lot of students do that because they only know how to do it one way.
It's easy.
Or they're scared. They're afraid to take a chance and do it something else because they're not really familiar with it. So I say in a paper, you should try all three of these, kind of back and forth, throughout your paper. And so that's the first one. The other one, you can start off with the person's name. You can start, Jones, and then of course the publication, 1998, found, and then the quotes. Students often have difficulty, using APA style. And then all they have to do is put, the page, parentheses, P, period, 199, and then they continue along with, some of their, response to that. So that's one way, or the second way of doing that. And then of course the last one, which I tend to use this one quite a bit, she stated, then the quote, and then of course you have Jones, comma, 1998, comma, P period 1999 closure parentheses. That's probably one of the most common ones that you use. So out of these, which one is probably one that you would use most likely more than the others? First, second, or third one?
First.
So you say first. Socorro, which one would you probably prefer?
I like the third.
Okay, you like the third one. I do too. I like that one. The idea is throughout your paper, if you do have quotes, and I say a rule of thumb, and I asked one of my graduate professors, because one thing I worried about was how many times should I quote in a paper? How do you find that happy medium? Now this is graduate school. I was working, it was a public policy, class, tobacco policy. And so I asked him, it was like, how many times should I quote, throughout, a 20, now this was a 25-page paper, 25, 30-page paper. And so he said a rule of thumb is to try to have one quotation or some source for every body paragraph you have. It's like, I don't really care about, the introduction or anything like that, because that's going to be a little bit different. You're kind of stating, some general, like purpose of the paper, so you're probably not going to have quotes necessarily in that. But your body paragraphs where you are talking about your points, you want to have between 1 and 2 quotations per, body paragraph. And so if you're writing a 5-page paper, you're probably going to have anywhere between, 10, maybe 15 citations, give or take, depending on what it is and how long your paragraphs and so forth are. And so that's kind of a rule of thumb. If you're going to be doing between 10 and 15, quotations or paraphrasing, you should not do, let's say, choose the third one here and do all 15 like that. You want to mix it up. And so, like, if you use one that way, try to mix it up and do it another way. So what we have learned from here is that if you decide to go with according to whoever, you have that publication immediately after their name in parentheses. In this case, it's 1998. You have your quotation, and if you notice, they have that comment, according to Jones, then the publication, and then the comma there, so always remember that comma. And then you have the quote, and then you have, in parentheses, P period 1999 in that case. And the other period is on the outside. That's important, to have it on the outside. I see a lot of students make the mistake and put it inside, because they want to put a period where you see that word time in there. They just want to do it. Don't do it. So have it on the outside there. Unless you are doing a block quote, which we'll talk about in a bit. So try to mix it up. Use all three of these at some point when you're writing your paper. Is what I would do. So if we go to the next. So let's take a look at long quotes. The long quotes. Now, in MLA, it tells you normally around 4 lines, 4 sentences or more, you use a block quote. Now, in APA, they tell you when it comes to words. Now, I don't expect you to count 40 words, but you can kind of get an idea if it's going to be a long, block quote. So a lot of times I still count the sentences, honestly. That's what I do. If I start seeing it into that 4th, 5th sentence, I know I'm going to do a block quote. I'm not going to sit there and count all the words. But they say 40 words. 40 words or longer, you want to use a block quote for that. So the example that I have, now in your paper when you are writing it, you're going to have, you're going to indent the first, line. So Jones's 1998 study found, or whatever. You're going to have that, and then below, you're going to indent student, and then the second line where it says especially, you're going to indent that as well. So you're going to have this flush kind of lined up there, and it's going to be kind of spaced a little bit more in. And why you're doing that is it's going to indicate that that's a block quote. And so, and now in the paper that I gave you, that sample, it shows you an example. I don't remember what page it's on, but they do have a sample of a block quote. So I'd always suggest, keep this sample with you, because whenever you're working on a paper, you can go back and look, because they have just about every example of what you need to do. And so, and if someone tells finds the page, let me know on there. But so that's a block quote. But if you look there at the bottom of that block quote, where's the period? It's on the inside. So we see, that it's period P. The 1999, there's no period on the outside there. It's on the inside where it says health there. That's a subtle difference. That's one of the reasons why I know it's a block quote. Not to mention how long it is. And you don't have quotation marks. That's another thing. It's a block quote, because since you are indenting everything and it's spaced over, that's how they know that it's block quote, and that's why you don't have to have quotations. That's a common mistake a lot of students make, is when they're so scared, because you get trained to put those quotation marks on there, and in the block quote you don't have to, but yet you still want to do it. And how many of us, having had experience with APA, have done a block quote and wants to put those quotation marks there?
I've never done a block.
Okay, wow. Anyone else has, even what MLA, because MLA is kind of similar. How many of us have done a block quote in MLA? And how did we do it? Did we do it similar to that?
Yeah, it was indented, the
Yep.
entire paragraph.
Entire deal was moved over, indented, so it stands out on its own. That's why you're not having those quotation marks. Now, another question that I asked that same professor was, how many block quotes should I have in a paper? Because some students who have a hard time filling the pages, they have a lot of block quotes, a lot, and that's not a good thing, And I mean, I've had some students. When I was in graduate school, I was looking at their paper and we're going over it, and they had like a block quote that's like a page and a half long, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this thing is not going to work. The professor is going to get you on this one. And so, sure enough, they did. The professor did get them on that. But there are some that would have like 6 and 7 block quotes, and when you factor that in, that adds maybe 3 or 4 pages in some cases to their 20, 25 page paper. So I see why they're doing it. They're trying to get the length, But the problem is that the professor knows that you're doing that, and so normally my professor, the one that I was working with, mainly what he told me, if you're going to write a 20 to 25 page paper, no more than 2 block quotes, no more than that, and don't have them real elaborate, and only if you absolutely have to have it. Don't just do it to do it. Only do it if you know that you need that information and it's crucial to your paper. Now, if you're writing a 5-page paper, 10-page paper, more undergrad, I would say no more than 1. And of course, make sure that it's truly relevant. If you're just putting it to put it there, don't do it. So if we go to the next, does everyone feel okay with that block quote? Okay. So if we go to the next, we will look at the reference page, and we're going to have a lot of examples as well on here. So typically, a reference page, is the same thing in MLA as the works cited page. It is on a separate page, and this is an example that you see. You still will have your running head on there, whatever your title of it is on there. You'll have the page number, because it's still going to be counted in your essay, and then you'll have references, so which is centered. That's the difference between APA and MLA. MLA will say works cited, and then you'll have APA that says references. So when people say, well, how do you know the difference? Well, that's one difference just right there, right off the bat. And so a lot of people who are not familiar with APA accidentally put works cited on there. And so you don't want to make that mistake. And I'll give you an example. When I had to use Chicago style or Trabian, we didn't use references. We used bibliography. That was the difference when it came to Chicago style and Trabian. And so you see these subtle differences. Now we're going to go a little bit more in detail about how do you do some of these, do the works cited pages in a minute. But normally, same rules apply as MLA. You do have to have it alphabetical, by last name. So that's one thing that you have to do, which is the same thing as MLA. You also typically will indent that second line, of your source. So like if you look up there, you have the source, and then that second line has been indented. Anything second line and below on when you're citing something will be indented. And they call it, I've heard some people call it like a hanging indent. or something like that. Basically indented, on there. So if we go to the next page, we'll actually show some examples here of how to do it. So if you're going to cite a book, so this is an example one. So if you're going to cite a textbook or a book in general, some of the things that you need to be looking for is, of course, the author. Author's last name, and then the first name, period. You have the year of publication. You have that in parentheses. Then you're going to have your title of work, and then of course you capitalize the letter also for the subtitle, and then you have your publisher. So those are the general things that you are looking for. And one thing I will say that I normally do when I write a paper, I do my works cited page first. I find my sources that I want to use, and I cite them. I get it out of the way, because one, I hate doing works cited pages. So why not just get it out of the way now? Now, obviously, if you decide not to use a source, just cut it out. It's not hard to do at that point. But I would find that most of us probably we don't like doing works cited pages. So why not do it first? And then also, and I always say, if it's too hard to cite, find another source. Why mess with it? Why put yourself through the headache? Unless you can go to your professor and they can show you. I just say, move on. Because there are some that are really tricky to cite. And I just say, if it's really not that big of a deal, if I don't really have to have that source, then I move on. And now, when I was in graduate school, we had requirements, like how many sites, sources that we had to have, and what type of sources we could have, primary versus, secondary sources. I mean, primary source would be like if it was a diary, from someone from the Civil War, because that's firsthand, account of something. But so we had to have certain types of sources as well. They loved periodicals, books, and so forth, and so we cited certain things quite a bit. So, citing a book was a pretty easy one to do after a while. And then there's an actual example that you see on how to do it. Now, obviously, that second line is indented. It just doesn't look like it's indented very well there. So, the second line and below is all indented. So you have the name, you have the year of publication, you have the title, and then, of course, you have the publication. That's listed on there. That's your standard type of APA. And so now one thing I like to use, and this is just something we'll talk about in a bit, but EBSCO. EBSCO is a great place to go to. It's basically it's a database that has all types of different articles, like periodicals and magazines, that's been uploaded onto this website. And they actually do the APA for you. There's a little link on there that you can click that says basically show me how to cite this, and it'll show the example, and you can just copy and paste it. So it's really great. So EBSCO we'll talk about a bit, but I love that. So if you are doing research and you're looking for sources, EBSCO is really good because it has a lot of academic resources on there. And so good, solid sources. So if we go to the next one, we will look at how to do online periodical. That's like EBSCO. That's kind of telling you. They have stuff uploaded there. So, for example, you have the authors, and maybe there's more than one, so that shows that right there. And then, of course, the date of publication. Once again, that second one is date of publication. Now, why is that different from MLA? Is in MLA, where do you put the year that it came out in? Is it towards the end? Yes, it's towards the end, but yet APA is towards the beginning. So you're already seeing that subtle difference right there. And that's how I can tell that it's APA, is because I'm seeing that publication or the date that it came out, the year, as the second thing there. So you have name, and then you're going to have the year of publication. And then, of course, you'll have the title. And then now if it's from an online source or online database or whatever, you see that it shows retrieve from and then the link. That's a difference there too, because APA, you use the words retrieve from, and then you have the source. Now in MLA, they've changed it. Now it used to be where you just had this big long link, and then the brackets, period on the outside, and all this stuff. They've kind of done away with that for the most part, unless your professor says otherwise. Nowadays in MLA, they tell you to put web. So most of you are probably familiar where you put WEB period web, to indicate that it's an internet source. Now some professors will also have you put that link in addition to having web on there. It just depends on them. And so the more updated version says that you don't have to do that as long as you indicate that it's from a web. So here you put retrieve from and then the actual source. And so the example, Bernstein, comma, in period, then of course 2002 in parentheses, period, then the title of the page, and then of course you're going to put retrieve from and then where it came from on there. So pretty straightforward overall. I would say that, I would always encourage you when you're working on your work site, make sure you have this in front of you. Because I can say, oh, it seems easy now, look at it, it's no big deal. But trust me, you're probably going to forget if you don't have this in front of you. So always have the resources in front of you and compare your resource that you have to an example of what they did. Because, if you make a mistake, at least you can say, this is why I did it. You can try to justify that. But also, a lot of people just make little mistakes where the comma